What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Nightblade healer. So Nightblade healers have pretty much stayed exactly where they have been as of the previous patch. They're definitely on the bottom tier when it comes to healing potential, healer, I guess, desirability and endgame PvE content, mainly because in terms of utility that they provide, it's fairly limited, and there's not really much that a Nightblade healer can provide that a Nightblade DPS or a Nightblade tank can already provide usually in an easier way. So while Nightblade healers are not necessarily highly desired in endgame content, they are still pretty decent. They are still able to clear all content in the game. It's just going to be a little bit more challenging to convince some of the higher end players to take you as a Nightblade healer. Nightblade healers do have some advantages that other healers don't have, and we'll be going over those towards the end of the video here. But generally speaking, what they bring to the table isn't going to be quite enough to match what a Templar, a Warden, or even a Sword healer might be able to bring to a team. So, just like the rest of our build videos, we will not be going over any gear options. So if you're interested in knowing what sort of gear you should be running as a healer, feel free to click in the upper right hand corner. There should be a video popping up right around now that will bring you to the healer gear video. You can go ahead and pause this video, check out the gear you want to get, and then come back here for a discussion on the skills, as well as the philosophy behind healing in ESO, as well as what separates Nightblade healers apart from other classes. So let's go ahead and get started here with gear. Or just not gear, skills. Starting off with our front bar, this is the Restoration Staff bar. We have Illustrious Healing. You can go with the other morph, which is Healing Springs, if you want the additional sustain, although you don't really need it too much in this particular patch. Then we have Combat Prayer, which gives out Minor Berserk, so this is a staple for all healers. Then we have Energy Orb for the heal, as well as the Combustion Synergy, which gives out resources for your DPS and tank. Then we have Healthy Offering. This is going to be your burst heal, but this does have a little bit of a downside to it, and that is the fact that it does drain your old health over 8 seconds, so it applies a small dot on you, but it is your only source of burst healing. Now, while you do have this dot on you, we're going with Healthy Offering versus the other morph, which is Shrewd Offering, because Healthy Offering provides that minor mending while we have our dot running. So one of the things you might want to do is actually keep that dot running. So you can, this is basically a stackable dot. So if you want to burst heal 3 people, you'll have 3 stacks of this dot ticking on you. But while you still have this dot on you, you do get that minor mending. So it may be beneficial just to make sure to always have that dot running on you. For example, every 8 seconds, just use this ability on somebody. That way you get the dot running and you get that minor mending, so you get a little bit more healing strength out. Might be beneficial to do that, but you do have to pay attention to your health because it does cost health in order to cost this ability. Then we have Radiant Regeneration. This is a flex spot, so we'll talk about a couple of skills you can use in place of Radiant Regeneration in a little bit here. This basically just acts as additional heal over time. Then we have Reviving Barrier for the shield, but it also provides some additional magic regen as well under the support line for the magic 8 passive, so we can get up to 10% additional magic regen while we have Reviving Barrier slotted. And on our back bar, we have Elemental Drain. So only one healer really needs to run Elemental Drain, so you can treat this as a flex spot if you don't need to run Ele Drain. Then we have Blockade of Storms to help proc enchants and proc off balance. Refreshing Path is another heal over time. Then we have Siphoning Attacks. This is going to be to help out our sustain if we need it. We might not need the sustain, so you can always drop Siphoning Attacks for any other ability if you'd prefer. Then we have Overflowing Altar. This is another flex spot. So as you can see here, Nightblade healers have a lot of flex spots just because a lot of their class abilities aren't that great when it comes to providing overall group buffs, group utility, and healing in general. Then we have Aggressive Warhorn for the major force buff. Now to go over some other class abilities you might want to have on hand. Lotus Fan applies minor vulnerability, and it is an AoE minor vulnerability. However, Lotus Fan is a tricky ability to use as a healer because it is basically a charge ability, which basically means it takes you from where you are and plops you right in front of the enemy. That's not always a desirable thing to want to have in a trial, especially as a healer. So you usually won't be running Lotus Fan very often. If you are running it, it'll probably just be for trash pulls to just apply it to every enemy around you when you jump in, or in fights where you're already going to be stacked up against the boss's tail, so you might as well use this anyways. So limited use cases, it's going to be better used on a tank because the tank wants to be in front of the boss. But there are some situations where you might be running this just for the minor vulnerability debuff. Another good ability would be Piercing Mark for Major Fracture, Major Breach. Normally, the tank will be getting this off with Pierce Armor, but there might be some strategies where the tank might not be able to apply Major Fracture or Major Breach because they might be playing at range. So, for example, Akesti's Hard Mode, a lot of strategies involve having the main tank be at range. So they'll have to taunt using Inner Rage, so they're not able to apply Major Fracture or Major Breach. So you might want to run Piercing Mark instead if that tank is not a Nightblade tank and can't apply a mark themselves. But very, very niche uses. Not very often you're going to be seeing this, see this being run. From there, moving on to the Shadow. If you want a source of minor maim, you can run Dark Shade here. It also does a little bit of damage as well, so that's always nice to have on hand. If you want to run a new ultimate, you can run Bolstering Darkness, which provides major protection when you use it. Also provides a synergy, which gives a really strong heal over time. So really nice when people need to be stacked up for any sort of execute mechanic for the major protection. One of the only sources of that in the game. If you want a raw healing ultimate, you can run Soul Siphon instead, which has a initial burst heal and then a strong heal over time afterwards. And you also give everybody major vitality as well. So that healing that is done is actually bumped up even higher. And then it also provides a additional synergy, which can also heal whoever activates it. So just in general, one of the strongest burst healing ultimates in the game through Soul Siphon that way. On the front bar, if you'd like, you can run Funnel Health as a heal over time. It's not a very strong heal over time, so as you can see here, 3,700, and it only heals for half of that, a little bit over half of that, every 2 seconds. So you're really taking a look at around maybe a 1900 heal right now. Obviously with buffs it'll be higher, so not terrible. So 1900 healing every 2 seconds just works out to be just shy of 1000 healing done per second, but every heal over time does help out here, so it might be worth running Funnel Health. You basically just have to run it once every 10 seconds, but if you don't have anything else to do, let's say your HOTS are already running, you don't need to reuse Healthy Offering to burst heal anybody, you could just spam Funnel Health here and just get a bunch of heals off because it does proc every time you use it. So you don't have to wait every 2 seconds, so you could be able to proc it every 1 second, but you will have to use this as kind of like a spammable, almost like a DPS ability. If you don't need to run Ellie Drain, let's say somebody is already getting major frac or major breach through Pierce Armor from a tank, you could run Debilitate instead because this also applies minor Magicka Steel plus an additional dot. So if you're running something like Zen's, Debilitate will help count towards that the Zen count for the debuff there. Plus it just deals some additional damage, which is always nice just to help burn things a little bit faster. For trash fights, you might want to try Sap Essence because it does have a heal. You can basically jump into a group and then just spam Sap Essence for a pretty okay heal. It's not really strong. It's not a burst heal, obviously, because it is an AoE heal. But it can be very strong with a lot of enemies around you. So 1616 plus 20% more for each enemy hit. So with one enemy right off the bat, you're already healing for 2000 to everybody. But if you're hitting something like 5 enemies, you're getting basically twice as much healing done. So it's 3200, at least with this particular tooltip, every time you use it. So potentially useful for trash fights, but it's still a fairly weak heal, even with a lot of trash. Under the Destro staff line, Ellie Drain, Elemental Blockade, obviously, but you might want to pick up Crushing Shock as a ranged interrupt. It's always good to have this option on hand. Under the Resto staff line, you could also run Healing Ward, which kind of acts as a quasi-burst heal. You will usually be pairing this with the Black Rose Prison Restoration staff for the major vitality that it provides. So not really something you'll see being used very often. The burst heal potential of this ability, it doesn't really match up to Healthy Offering. Plus you already have a lot of heal over time abilities going out, so you might not need the burst heal to begin with. But still a pretty decent ability nonetheless. If you want to run a shield for additional survivability, you can run either Dampen Magic or Harness Magicka. Pick whichever one you want, depending on whether you want a larger shield or a little bit more sustain. If you are running Zen, you will want to pick up a couple more single target dots, so that'd be something like Soul Trap under the Soul Magic line, or Degeneration under the Mage's Guild line. So if you are running Zen, you do want to try to pick up as many single target dots as you can. Light Blades are in a pretty good spot because you have so many flex spots, so you could just plop them on to any of those flex spots that I mentioned earlier. Backing up a bit to the Fighter's Guild line, there is an ability called Ring of Preservation, which provides minor protection to anybody within the radius, as well as a small heal over time. Very similar to Bolstering Darkness, it's a great ability to use when you're stacked up for any sort of high damage scenario or execute scenario. Under the Citric Order line, both Morphs of Mend Wounds, Symbiosis, and Mend Spirit are technically one of the strongest moves when it comes to healing done per second. That's not a very important statistics for healers. Usually buff up times and debuff up times are more important to kind of evaluate the overall effectiveness of a healer. But if you do just need raw healing done per second, you can pick up either of these morphs. This basically acts as a toggleable, so it changes your light and heavy attacks from damage to healing. So you won't be able to hit the enemy anymore with your light and heavy attacks, so that will end up bringing down your enchant proc rate. But instead, you just gain a massive heal with the light and heavy attacks. So there are some situations where this might be useful, but it's not typically something you will see being run. You will want to unlock all the abilities under the Undaunted line, so Overflowing Altar for the Minor Lifesteal and the Bloodfeast synergy, Shadow Soak for the Black Widow synergy, which is still useful just for the Castius Major Slayer uptime. There will be some strategies that require you to taunt things, so you will want to pick up Inner Rage. And then you have Bone Surge for the Spinal Surge synergy, which provides Major Vitality to everybody around you when you activate it, so definitely very useful in certain fights, like example Cloud Rest to help combat Baneful Mark and Execute. Obviously, you're already running Energy Orb for the Heal and Combustion synergy. Finally, under the Alliance War line, we already talked about Reviving Barrier, but you can also run Efficient Purge as well if you need to purge negative effects off of your allies. So there are some fights where you will need to run Purge, so just make sure to have this unlocked and ready. And that pretty much covers all of the skill options here. So just to kind of review, for our front bar here, these 4 abilities here, I would say you definitely want to have on hand. You can swap out this ability for something else. You have a flex spot on the front bar, and then you have a flex ultimate here. And on your back bar, you will want to maintain Blockade of Storms and Refreshing Path. Elemental Drain is a flex if you don't need to run it. Siphoning Attacks is a flex if you don't need to sustain, which most healers won't. And then Overflowing Altar is also a flex, so you can replace this with any of the abilities mentioned above. So you have 3 flex spots on the back, and then you have Aggressive Warhorn, which you can place here, or on the front bar, or on both bars if you would like. So that pretty much covers all of our stuff for healers in terms of skills. Now let's go ahead and talk about the philosophy behind healing. So for those of you guys who are coming over from other MMOs, healing in ESO is a little bit different. Your main job is still the same. Just heal everybody, make sure nobody dies, keep everybody alive. But there's a second component to healers' jobs in group content, and that is providing buffs for the allies and debuffing the enemy. This basically boils down to a single premise, which is help buff your DPS as high as possible. If you think about it this way, if the faster your DPS are able to kill things, the less time is spent healing. So it just makes your job a little bit easier that way. Where the buffs and debuffs come from will obviously be from your skills as well as sets that you're running. So for example, you have the Master's Restoration Staff, which provides sustain for both magic and stamina DPS, and Minor Berserk through Combat Prayer, which also has a heal associated with it. So it's not like you are giving up heals in order to provide these buffs at all. Energy Orb for the additional sustain, which also has a heal. So again, you're not giving up heals when you're providing these buffs. In terms of debuffs, you have things sets like Martial Knowledge, you have the Minor Vulnerability from Lotus Fan. If you're running that, you have Elemental Drain for Minor Magicka Steal. So you have a lot of different ways to buff and debuff in ESO. And the hallmarks of a great healer is maintaining your buff and debuff uptimes. The healer that's able to maintain 100% uptime on that 5% basically max Zen debuff, the healer that's able to get max uptime on the Martial Knowledge debuff, the healer that's able to get 100% uptime on Minor Berserk. Those are the kind of things that raid leaders are looking for when they're evaluating the effectiveness of their overall healers. Yes, the amount of healing that you do is important. You obviously want to heal enough to make sure your allies stay alive. But in ESO, it is actually very easy to overheal in this game. A lot of people aren't running very high health as DPS. You typically will be healing maybe 18, 19k health on DPS, which is actually pretty easy to do, especially because you have a lot of layered dots going, or HOTS going, I should say. Obviously, you don't want to kill your allies by placing dots on them. So it's actually very easy to keep people alive. So the general premise behind healing in ESO is basically put down enough heal over time abilities to basically cover yourself, cover any incoming damage. Burst heal when necessary. Don't burst heal as your main source of healing. Your main source of healing should be coming from heal over time abilities like Illustrious Healing, Energy Orb, Radiant Regeneration, and so on. And then the time that you're not spent, kind of between the heal over times when you have to renew them, it should be spent buffing allies, debuffing enemies. So using Combat Prayer on cooldown, keeping an eye on your dots if you are running them for Zens, making sure you have Martial Knowledge proccing all the time, Minor Vulnerability through IA if you're running that, or Lotus Fan. So that's kind of what that kind of is the hallmark of a great healer. Now, in terms of what Nightblade healers can provide to the group that other healers can't, we already covered some of these already when we talked about skills. So we have Minor Vulnerability on demand through Lotus Fan, AoE Minor Vulnerability at that. Again, if you have a Nightblade tank, it's usually going to be the Nightblade tank that's running this ability, but if you don't, Nightblade healers are probably the most consistent way to get Minor Vulnerability outside of Warden healers with Veteran Infection. So that's one thing that they bring to the group, particularly the AoE potential, just to apply AoE Minor Vulnerability for trash fights. Very, very strong tool here. But beyond that, there's actually not too much else that a Nightblade healer is able to offer. They have no unique group synergy, so they don't have a synergy tied to any class spammable, class active ability. All of your class synergies come from ultimates. So not much there. Your heal over time, I should say your burst heal, your class burst heal, healthy offering, has a small dot attached to it, so something that does require quite a bit of a learning curve to know when to use it. You won't be able to use it if it will kill you, the cost I should say, but you can still die from the dot that is applied to you if you're using it too often. So that's one of the kind of things you have to watch out for as a Nightblade healer. There is kind of a learning curve to learning how to use healthy offerings so you don't end up stacking too much of the dot that is applied to you. Beyond that though, Nightblade healers do have two very powerful healing ultimates in their class ultimates, Bolstering Darkness and Soul Siphon. So in terms of progression stuff, if you just want raw healing, Nightblade healers are definitely pretty strong when it comes to their ultimate use case. So generally speaking, the main weakness of the Nightblade healer is just the lack of a class synergy and just kind of generally not providing too many buffs. You do get Minor Savagery as a class unique buff, but that requires you to critically hit things, and as a healer your crit chance will probably be on the lower side unless you're running the Thief Mundus. So you're not really going to be able to... Well, you should be able to reliably get it because it lasts for 20 seconds, but it is something that already can be provided through either a Nightblade tank or a Stamina Nightblade, so not really something that's necessarily unique to the Nightblade healer. So I don't usually heal on a Nightblade healer. I actually don't have a setup for a Nightblade healer, and I don't normally heal either. So, one of the things that I have done is I have 4 content creators down in the description below. I have links to their Twitch channels or their YouTube channels. These guys are people who main healers for endgame PvE content. So you guys have any questions about healing in general, I do recommend checking out their Twitch streams and leaving any comments, any questions you have when they are streaming, or to the YouTube channel and try to ask questions on some of their videos there. But that concludes this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions, again, a link in the description below to a couple of content creators. You could also leave them down here, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. Again, hope you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.